Yeah, okay. Yeah, so thank you very much for inviting us to the seminar. My name is Nadia, and today with my co-author Sergey, we will present our recent work on investigating pre-trained models of code. So the talk will consist of two parts, actually. In the first part, I will present our recent work on subtokenization for source code. And in the second part, Sergey will present our work about probing analysis of pre-trained models of code. And maybe just to give a small introduction why these maybe two not very connected topics are together in one presentation. So as you all know, neural networks are now widely used for source code processing. And if 2 years ago, let's say, the research was focused on developing code-specific models, code-specific architectures, in recent 2 years, the focus shifted more to pre-trained models of code because they usually outperform models trained from scratch, even if these are some code-specific models. And so for our research team, me, Sergey, and some other students, our initial focus of research was how can we incorporate source code specifics in neural network architectures, for example, in Transformer. But since in recent years, the focus more shifted to pre-trained models, we also started investigating them. Again, our question was like, how can we utilize source code properties, source code specifics for pre-trained models? And so this is how these two directions appeared. So our one direction was to try to improve pre-trained models using source code specifics and properties. And so we worked on subtokenization options. And our another direction was try to analyze what knowledge of source code properties do pre-trained models have. And we did it using probing. Can I please ask to turn off microphones because it's a little bit distracts me. Yeah, thank you very much. So let's begin with the first part. This is the full name, this is the work investigating subtokenization options for pre-trained models of code. And we presented it at Deep Learning for Code workshop this year at iClear. So the general pipeline of pre-trained language models is just a quick reminder, because I guess you all know that. So we have these two stages, pre-training and fine-tuning. And at pre-training stage, we want to learn some very general model, which will be later adapted, fine-tuned for our specific task. And during pre-training, we use some large data set, just general data set. Usually it's collected from GitHub, for example. And we don't have any specific task here. So we use, it's called self-supervised pre-training, meaning that we don't need any labeled data here. We just learn, for example, we use masked language modeling to pre-train some model, let's say BERT or some other model. And then on fine-tuning, we have some task-specific data and task-specific objective. And also a quick reminder about the whole pipeline of this pre-training scheme, or maybe of general transformer. We have our source code, some program. And in this approach, we just to pass it to the model. We don't consider any syntactic trees or graphs or anything. We just use the textual representation of the program. And it appears to be enough for very high performance with these pre-trained models. And to do so, the first step is that we split this textual representation into subtokens. And then this sequence of subtokens is passed to the model. It's usually a transformer model. And then we have some predictions and loss, and depending on the stage we are now, we do now, it's either masked language modeling objective, for example, for pre-training, or some task-specific objective for fine-tuning. And since the focus of the work will be about subtokenization, just again, quick reminder on what subtokenization is. The easiest approach to obtain a sequence of tokens would be just to get some fixed size vocabulary. But in this case, many tokens will be replaced with unknown token. And to avoid that, what we do, we split rare tokens into subtokens. Like, for example, freq lists splits into freq lists. And all very frequent tokens will be like the entire token. Like, for example, 4 is not split into anything, and range is also like entire token. Okay, so when the community started utilizing these pre-trained models for code, how did it happen? Like, initially, all these models actually were developed for natural language processing. And then first worked, they just took the same pipeline from NLP and applied it to source code. For example, these two first work, for example, this QBERT work, they just trained a BERT model on a corpora of Python code. Using the same pipeline, and already achieved very, very nice results with this approach. Then community started to trying to improve these models, and this went into two main directions. So first direction was trying different models from NLP. Like BERT, for example, is encoder-only model. GPT, as you all know, is decoder-only model. For example, PRBART is encoder-decoder model. And another direction was to try to change pre-training objectives, maybe develop code-specific pre-training objectives. And so, for example, graph code BERT uses data flow prediction objective in addition to masked language modeling. And for example, Code-T5 for DOP, they use some kind of variable naming objective in addition to language modeling, masked language modeling. So these were like two directions for improving pre-trained models of code. And when we started working on that, like we studied the literature, saw that, and we also noticed that another important part of the pipeline, subtokenization, actually, it is usually not covered, not enough in the paper, and it's just touched upon very superficially. So usually these works, they either just write, we do the following subtokenization and like very short description, or at most they give like a couple of paragraphs describing some reasonable choices they made regarding the subtokenization. However, none of these works actually investigated this question in depth, trying to understand like what are dimensions we can change in subtokenization, which dimensions are more and which are less important, and have like what influence do they have on performance? Does it actually matter what subtokenization we use, or they all lead to same performance, for example? So we decided to investigate this question in more detail and to pay more attention to this part of pipeline, this subtokenization part. And actually, this is a kind of important thing because so subtokenization is like the model gets its subtokenization at the pre-training stage, and then later at the fine-tuning stage, we have to use the same subtokenization which was used during pre-training. We cannot change it later. So it's like it's important to choose a correct subtokenization during pre-training, because otherwise we may get some inefficiency at the end. So that was the focus of this work. And like 4 criteria which we want to optimize, we selected 2 of them, of course, 2 like most reasonable of them. So first criteria is, of course, downstream performance. So how does subtokenization influence downstream performance in different tasks? And another criteria is actually length efficiency. So as we all know, transformers complexity is quadratic with respect to the input length. And so if we have some very long sequences, they will be processed really slower. So we want to have tokenization which will somehow compress our sequences and result in quite short sequences. So we wanted to find length efficient subtokenization, for example, without downstream performance drop. Or understand, like, for example, we can compress sequences like at a large portion, but with the following performance drop. So we wanted to investigate this question as well. So here are the options we considered. So these are subtokenization and granularity. I will talk about it later in more detail. The algorithm of subtokenization that we use, vocabulary size, transferability between programming languages, and also the effect of stochastic tokenization. And since there are like quite several options here, and it would be really hard to combine all of them. And like when we want to consider one option, what we have to do, we have to pre-train the whole model. It's a long process and resource consuming, and then fine tune it on several tasks. So we cannot afford just to make the full, to make the full grid of all options. So what we did, we decided to start from some fixed baseline tokenization, some reasonable one, and then add one modification per time. So each time we pre-train new model and fine-tune and then test them it on several tasks. As for the testing ground for this, we selected the PO-BART model. The reason was actually very pragmatic. At the time of writing this work a year ago, there were already several released like large pre-trained models of code, but almost none of them released all the code for pre-training, for collecting the data, etc. So usually they only released the pre-trained model itself. And so the PO-BART, at that moment, PO-BART was the only model with released all code. So that's why we used this model. And actually it was like very close or state of the art at that time. It was a year ago. Now, of course, you maybe laugh at this statement, but a year ago, it was a state of the art model. Okay, and so as for downstream tasks, we wanted to select code discriminative tasks and code generative tasks. So for code discriminative tasks, we used code summarization and clone detection. So we have code as input, and we want to predict either textual summary or whether two snippets are clones or not, so classification. As code generative tasks, we considered code generation on the Concode dataset. From text, we want to generate code, from textual description, generate code. And also code translation between Python and Java on the avatar dataset. So here we have code as output, and it is considered to be like a more complex task. A little bit more about our experimental setup before we will move forward to the experimental part. So for pre-training data, we have this number of Python functions and Java functions. So the model we use, PO-BART, works on the function level, not on the code file level, for example. And this data was crawled through BigQuery interface. And also we include some natural language data in the pre-training crawled from Stack Overflow. So the basic model is a BART model. It's an encoder-decoder transformer. It's trained using denoising objective. So as input, we have some corrupted code. For example, some spans are masked. And we want to output uncorrupted code. And it's trained using FairSec library. So we work on a function level, and this is the size of our model. So today we will actually call it a small model. But again, a year ago, it was one of the largest models. It happened that in recent year, many much larger models were released with billions of parameters. And actually this year we got a review for our other work, this similar model that we work on, that the approach was only tested on a small model. And it's kind of funny because one such model trains for 5 days on 4 Tesla 800 GPUs. So like it's not very small model. And we're actually very grateful to HPC the supercomputer for providing these resources for us, because otherwise this work wouldn't be possible. So for subtokenization, we use sentence piece library. It's commonly used choice for that. Baseline tokenization, it has 50K vocabulary. Code is normalized, so it will be easier for the model to learn it. And we also clip all sequences to this maximum sequence length. Actually, this covers almost all sequences. In a rare scenario, when the sequence is longer than this, we just clip it. But it's rare, and in appendix we try some experiments investigating the effect of this clipping, and it's actually not very large, so it's okay like to clip these sequences. And all hyperparameters are the same as in the original PO-BART paper. So I don't see any questions in the chat. If there are any questions, please cut them, or I will go forward. but I guess, yeah, there were no results yet. So where do we take questions? Okay, cool. So now we will go through these dimensions we considered. And the first dimension was subtokenization granularity. And this is actually the dimension where we really can utilize some specifics of source code, some specific properties. So granularity means like how complex are tokens we consider. So we can just consider very simple tokens like 4E in range, or we can include some composite tokens, how we call it, tokens including several tokens. Like, for example, 4E in range could be a single token. And so if we just use the tokenizer or subtokenizer, how we call it, from NLP, what usually happens is that all punctuation characters are considered as separate characters. And it's reasonable in NLP because in NLP, we have very low percentage of punctuation characters. So they don't affect length much. And it's just okay. But on the contrary, in source code, we have, for example, many punctuation characters. And so about 10% actually of all the code has been measured. And so considering each punctuation character as a separate token will result in very long, very large lengths, actually long sequences. So what we thought of at the beginning was that we can try to, for example, group these punctuation characters. And this will shorten sequences quite well. But also, like this is the first specific feature. We have many punctuation characters in source code compared to text. And also in source code, we have quite many so-called idioms, like very commonly used token combinations, like 4E in range, diff init, or something. These are very commonly used idioms. And so we can actually have them in our tokens as well. We can obtain them through tokenization. So inspired by this, we introduced these levels of granularity, starting from lowest level where we have all characters as separate tokens, to the largest level where we have like unrestricted tokens of composite tokens of unrestricted complexity. Of course, they are all learned automatically. So this subtokenization, it's learned from the data. And it just selects during training of subtokenizer, these idioms are selected based on their frequency automatically. And so what are the levels in between? So our first level, level 1, is this idea, basic idea that we can merge punctuation characters. For example, if there are several closing brackets, which is a frequent pattern in code, we can merge them in one token, or, for example, this thing. Also, we include new lines, indents and deadends in punctuation, like it's because it's also some special characters. So, for example, this can also be a composite token at this level. So there are also 2 other levels in between. Let's first talk about third level. So third level is where, like on fourth level, we allow any composite tokens. And the third level, we take a step back from that, and we allow only composite tokens which are limited to one code statement. So here, new line can be included in composite tokens, and here not. That's the difference. And level 2 is again in between, but level 2 is like more close. It's closer to level 1. So here we also like in level 1, we wanted to separate textual tokens and punctuation. So here they don't mix. We can have composite tokens of punctuation, but textual tokens are always separate. At level 2, it's almost similar, but we allow joining dot with textual token because it's very common pattern that we have dot something in source code. And as for underscore is not considered as punctuation character in our work at all. So underscores can be included in textual tokens even at level 0, because underscores are usually a part of identifiers for source code. Okay, so finally we have these several levels from very small granularity to very high granularity. Let's skip it all. And now let's look at the results, how they compared. Yeah, there is a question, please. Mikhail? I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now can.
So my question is, did you use masking for the variables? So say you have for I in range, and you can also have for j in range, for k in range, and effectively this is all the same. So did you consider these things independently, or did you consider them to be all the same because you masked the variable?
So if we have composite token for E in range, it will be masked. The entire token will be masked. Yeah. So masking is applied after tokenization. So whatever tokens we have, we mask them. We don't split it into smaller granularity in that case.
So no. So my point is that basically for I in range and for j in range are going to be embedded in with the different embeddings, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is just basically technical thing. How we define tokenization or other stuff is the same. So let's look at the results. So here we have 8 plots for performance, and the rightmost plot is for length. Length is computed over pre-training data, but we also checked it over fine-tuning data, and the trends are similar. What tasks do we have? So here are 4 plots for code translation, 2 plots for code summarization, code generation, and clone detection. And for code translation, we have 4 plots because we consider 2 cases. So first is a full avatar data set where we have code blue metric. But of course, like it's not a perfect metric for code generation. The perfect metric, okay, not perfect, but much better metric would be to run the code and measure like how well it works. So the avatar data set released that as well. So they have a subset of the data set where you can actually run the code and measure computational accuracy, how many examples programs passed all tests. So we consider it here as well. The drawback of this is that it considers a smaller data set, so it's more noisy, less stable, etc. But we decided that it's important to include this here as well because it's more reliable metric for code generation. For code summarization, we have below because here target is text. For code generation, we have code below because with the Concode data set, unfortunately, it's impossible to run the code. It's not standalone, so we can only use some below-based metrics here, or exact match, which is even worse, I guess. And in clone detection, we have F1 measure because it's classification problem. So as for the results about granularity, what we observe, first, let's look at the length. So here, level 1, where we allow merging of punctuation characters, actually it results in very nice sequence compression by 17%, which is cool. And then the higher the granularity level, the shorter are the sequences, of course. And with level 4, we get about 40% sequence compression, which is quite impressive. Now about the performance. So our first observation is that orange bar is always the same or even better than blue bar. So level 1 actually does not hurt performance. So it compresses sequences, but doesn't hurt performance in all tasks. So this is like one of the main conclusions of our work, that at least we can merge these punctuation characters. It's a small thing, but if you don't think about it, if you don't do it, you have like really longer sequences. And that's actually what happens in practice. So people sometimes don't pay attention to subtokenization, don't like think about it, and we show that it's important to consider this direction for improving the model. As for higher level of granularity, we see that the higher the level, the worse is the performance. So for level 4 purple bar, in generative tasks, it's almost worse, significantly worse than levels 0 and 1. So here, for example, as well. In some discriminative tasks, it could be similar to, or even better, but it may be better because of the effect of length. So we compress the length, we clip less. This way, the model actually has more information. So this is the reason why it could be better here, actually, as I understand it. Yeah, but generally, level 4 leads to worse performance. So you can compress sequences, but but it will hurt performance. Level 3 as well.
Misha has another question, I guess.
Yeah. I saw. I wanted to finish my thought and then ask Misha.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, thank you, of course. Yeah, so for level 2, for example, we see that sometimes it's on par, sometimes it's worse than level 1. We hypothesize it's because in code generation is really identifier centered problem. Maybe that's connected, but like in general, we cannot say level 2 is a similar performance always as a level 0 and 1. Yeah, Misha, please, your question. Sorry.
All right, it's more of a comment than of a question, but I would like to notice that there is a recent paper on new metric called Crystal Blue, in which they evaluate their own metric and Code Blue and Blue for code translation. And they find that Code Blue is abysmally bad for the code translation. Basically, the estimate of a Code Blue is only slightly better than random. So maybe it's, for what I see for the, and our experience for the, our experience for code generation with Code Blue is that Code Blue is also quite bad. And for the code summarization, there is a paper by Roy et al. Well, where they show that the best metric is bird score, but if bird score is not that good for you for whatever reason, then you probably should use CHR-F. And the trick is that for the difference in scores of less than 2 points is probably insignificant from the point of view of the human annotator. So, I mean, from the result that you present, I would not be, and given our experience in Crystal Blue, Water experience, and Roy et al. Experience, I would probably argue that while I do see the error bars, and I don't understand how did you compute them, we cannot rule out that the human annotators would say that there is no significant performance drop. That would be my comment.
Can you please send those 2 papers you mentioned? We will be very curious to read them.
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
We chat. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I totally agree that these are not perfect metrics. So actually, for Blue, for example, in translation, it's in machine translation. It's also now common to use character F. Yeah. For code translation, it's good we have computational accuracy here. So here we see the similar trends. Hopefully, it's a more reliable result. Yeah, but of course, Code Blue. Actually, when Code Blue was introduced, as far as I remember, did they have any human evaluation in the original paper? I'm actually not sure. Yes, so of course it's not the perfect metric, right?
They had some human evaluation, but the human evaluation they had was very fishy, to be honest, because they evaluated Code Blue, and I think it was F1 or something like that. And my problem with that was that every metric hit something above 0.9 on the agreement rate. I don't exactly recall how did the compute agreement rate, but if you look at the other generation or translation tasks, the 0.9 agreement rate is something unbelievable. So that's why I was quite unhappy with their results. And when we did our experiments with code generation, we found very low agreement rate with the humans. And I mean, not only for Code Blue, but for all the other metrics as well, which kind of could be expected. But the Code Blue was significantly worse than other metrics. And it could be argued that out of the 6 metrics we considered for the code generation, it was second worst, beating only Blue, which is somehow ironic, I would say.
Yeah,
the agreement actually is very low, even between humans. So.
Yeah, as a small excuse, I will say that these experiments were run a year ago. But yeah, of course, these are not perfect metrics.
I'm not, it's not any kind of an attack on your work. It's more like maybe it is that there is more to be extracted from the high level of compression, and maybe the high level of compression is no worse at all for the computation purposes. And as soon as it allows us to compress the data further, it might be very, might be very beneficial.
Yeah, but here we have computational accuracy, and here we get drop, and this is actually more reliable metric.
So yeah, for this one I agree, yeah.
Yeah, but what I would like to add here that when we presented our work at Deep Learning for Code workshop, so we had a discussion with Vincent Hellendorn, who stopped by our poster. He said that they trained much larger models, of course, not with hundreds of millions of parameters, but with some billions of parameters. And he said that they used unrestricted complexity tokens, and it didn't lead to performance drop in their experiments. But I don't remember any details, and they don't have preprint on that. They didn't report anywhere, so it's just very like thing I can say now. But we hypothesize that it also depends on the model size. Like here we have 100 millions of parameters, and thus we can only afford level 1. But if we have larger number of parameters, maybe we can afford higher levels without performance drop. Yeah, so that may be also a factor here. So we try to do some qualitative analysis to extent it is possible, because it's actually hard to measure the things. Like intuitively, the problem in code generative tasks with composite tokens is that inaccurate generation of a long token may change the entire code we generate after that. So as an example, like level 3, for example, may generate token range 0, and it will have to end something after that. It cannot, since it's generated auto-regressively, we cannot change already generated tokens. So if we generate some token by mistake, we have to deal with that in that case. And but usually it does not, like from our manual analysis, usually it does not result in many errors. Like for example, here we just generate 0n instead of range n, which is actually equivalent. Or another example for level 3 may generate, for example, for L in range, for R in this range. So here we want to traverse all unique pairs in an array. And the correct thing to do would be like this. So we don't traverse pairs twice. And here the model traverses like some pairs twice, because it generated token, then this token. And then when it generated the second line, it repeated token range 0. And so now it's like, it's still correct code, but it's less efficient. But it may happen in practice, yeah. But it's very hard to measure quantitatively this effect. We did not come with the approach how to do that. So we just can give some examples and intuition why it may be harmful for the model. Okay. So that was about subtokenization granularity. Now let's move on. The second thing we considered was subtokenization algorithm. So there are many subtokenization algorithms. BPE is byte pair encoding is most commonly used, most famous, I would say. The second well-known approach would be unigram LM. So their difference is actually BPE starts from separate characters and gradually merges them, like down, top-down, bottom-up approach. And unigram LM is top-down, vice versa. So it like selects large tokens from in the top-down manner. It uses some kind of EML algorithm inside. And there was work showing that for BERT pretrained on textual data, unigram LM is slightly more preferable than BPE. And we wanted to test the similar effect for code. Of course, there are other tokenization algorithms like WordPiece, which is some modification of BPE, but we didn't consider them here. We just consider these two major algorithms. So here are the results. We after that we recomputed the results and we did not. Okay, let me first tell about average length. So from the length point of view, they lead to very similar lengths, so almost no effect. From the performance point of view, unigram LM slightly outperforms BPE in almost all tasks. So here is one exception, but as I already started saying, when we recomputed the results, we didn't reproduce this difference. So actually, unigram LM is always like similar or slightly better than BPE. So like from this, we can conclude that in practice, if you are of the stage that you can easily change one algorithm to another, for example, in sentence piece library, it's just you change the hyperparameter setting. So if it's easy thing to do for you now, we suggest doing it. But if you already trained your model, for example, with BPE, it's not worth retraining it with Unigram-LM because like the difference is very small. And also, we already discussed that code volumetric, for example, is not very reliable. So again, if it's hard to replace one thing with another, it's not worth that. And even here, the differences usually are up to 1 standard deviation, which is a very small difference, not necessarily significant. So yeah, so generally we would conclude they lead to similar performance, but like Unigram is slightly better than BP. Sergey, can you please copy the links Misha sent? Thank you, so that we save them. But what was also interesting that we also conducted some qualitative analysis. The original work, which compared BP and Unigram-LM for BERT, they argued that Unigram-LM is somewhat better aligned with morphology. And thus, then when you will generate text, for example, like intuitively, it should be easier for Unigram-LM to compose words from morphemes because it's like better aligned with morphology. But it's very intuitively hand wavy. It's very hard to measure these effects. But we wanted to see whether a similar effect happens for code. So we measured, like we considered native tokenization by camel case or snake case of identifiers. And we indeed observed that Unigram-LM is better aligned with this native subtokenization. So for example, here we have correct tokenization, like same as native tokenization with Unigram-LM, and BPE splits dotted into dotted. Here we have is instantiated, and BPE makes is in instantiate, so it's worse aligned with native subtokenization. Here BPE merges 2 tokens together. Here and here it detaches 1 single letter. So the Unigram-LM is indeed better aligned. We also measured this quantitatively. So we selected 150K Python identifiers and measured the Jacquard similarity between native subtokenization and produced subtokenization. So we consider bag of tokens for each identifier, bag of tokens with Unigram-LM, let's say, and with native subtokenization. And we look how similar are these 2 sets of tokens. And this can be measured easily with Jacquard similarity. And we obtained that for Unigram-LM, this value is much higher than from BPE. So it's indeed better aligned with the native subtokenization. Though it should be noted here that in most cases, they result in similar tokenization. But like in cases where they do not, Unigram-LM is aligned better. Inspired by a suggestion of one of the reviewers, we also measured input-output intersection rate. Like you have input to your transformer and you have output to your transformer. And intuitively, like if there is a high intersection rate, it will be easier for the model to repeat some tokens in the output from input. And we indeed observed that for Unigram-LM, this intersection rate is a little bit higher usually than for BP. So it's like intuitively, again, it will be easier for the model to generate with Unigram-LM. And we also measured quantitatively that indeed BP detaches single letters sometimes, and it happens more frequently with BP than with Unigram-LM, like this, which is unreasonable at all from human point of view. Okay, so this was a tokenization algorithm. It doesn't have much influence on performance, but some slight influence. We also tried different vocabulary sizes. So there was a work on machine translation where they tried different vocabulary sizes. And they showed that for transformer, smaller vocabularies actually lead to better performance. So we wanted to check whether the similar effect appears for code. So we try several vocabulary sizes with Unigram-LM. And so the smaller the vocabulary size is, again, the smaller is granularity. So here, basically, we consider even smaller granularities than level 0. So here, some tokens will be split into smaller pieces. Like reachable is not split with 50K, it's split like this with 10K, and like this with 2K. So of course, it has an effect on length. So the smaller the vocabulary, the larger the length. But what about performance? So about performance, we observe indeed that with smaller vocabularies, performance is somewhat better. In some cases, like for code generation, it was better with smaller vocabularies. With code summarization, it was by 1 standard deviation better. And here again, as far as I remember, it did not reproduce here because it's very noisy actually benchmark. So again, it looks like smaller vocabularies may lead to a little bit better performance, but here it happens at the cost of longer sequences. So if it's very important in your application, like to have small percentage improvement on performance, maybe considering smaller vocabularies will worth it. Otherwise, it will not worth it. And interestingly, we observe that more pronounced performance improvement, it happens for identifier-centered tasks, for example, code translation. Identifiers there are very simple because when people write their code, it's more algorithmic-centered tasks, like sorting, for example. You don't use complex identifiers there, so it doesn't have large effect in this case. But in code, the task is to select correct API calls usually, which are long identifiers, long complex identifiers. So in this case, this effect of vocabulary is more pronounced because complex identifiers are then split into smaller pieces, and it may be easier to compose them from smaller pieces in that case. And if we put together two last results, we can observe that actually in 3 cases, we can obtain a significant performance improvement if we replace commonly used BPE 50K by unigram-LM 10K. And in 2 tasks, we get 1 STD, 1 standard deviation improvement. It's just a nice thing to put in your abstract in your paper, so we did it. Okay, so these were main results on what you can change in your subtokenizer. So our main result is that we can group punctuation without harm to performance, and we really suggest to do it because it compresses sequences and does not hurt performance. Or with larger models, you can consider larger granularity tokens. And also, like we suggested to use unigram-LM 10K instead of BPE 50K, but again, in cases when you can easily afford it. Otherwise, the performance improvement is quite small, so maybe it's not worth that. And we had code BPE in the title of our paper. So we call this approach of grouping punctuation code BPE or code unigram-LM, depending on the algorithm you use. Yeah, so we call it like that. Of course, we needed to make a paper more visible, like have something in the title which attracts attention. Yeah, so that's what code BPE comes from. And just a couple of more slides. So we also investigated the transferability between programming languages, because it sometimes happens in source code that you pre-train your model on one language and then apply it to another language. And we wanted to test if we train subtokenizer only like on one language, for example, will it matter or not? On this plot, we didn't do it. It will be on the next slide. On this plot, we just computed frequency of tokens in 2 languages. So here, the subtokenizer is trained on both languages, and we just evaluate frequency in each language. And each square denotes number of tokens in this bin. And so the good thing is that almost all tokens are near diagonal. So almost all tokens are language independent. So they have similar frequencies in both languages. These black rectangles, they select areas of language-specific tokens, which are frequent in one language and infrequent in another. And interestingly, we observe that, for example, for level 0, only 12% of tokens are this language specific, all others are language independent. And even more interestingly, for level 4, which has many complex identifiers, the complex tokens, composite tokens, this percentage is only 20%. So 80% of tokens are like frequent in both languages. So this should happen because we balance languages during training our subtokenizer. Yeah, but this is actually a positive thing. And here we test actually if we train Unigram LM on Python only, and then we pre-train PO-BART on both languages and apply it to different languages. So we can see that the effect of Python is negligible, and effect on Java is again not very large. So subtokenizers are actually transferable between programming languages, and the effect on performance is again very small. So there is not large difference anywhere here, just up to one standard deviation, both positive or negative. And last slide about BP dropout. We also tried utilizing stochastic tokenization during fine-tuning, because like in practice, nobody will use BP dropout during pre-training. And here we observe that there is almost no effect of BP dropout. Again, it doesn't look like a very important thing to do. Okay, so that's it. So in this work, we consider different directions. How can we change the tokenizer for source code? Our main conclusion is that one should definitely consider different granularities, test them, and basically we suggest using these punctuation merges, but also higher granularity tokens may be good with larger models. Changing subtokenization algorithm or vocabulary size may lead to slight improvement, but it's usually quite small, and subtokenizers are well transferable between programming languages. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, please ask them. And we also have a part by Sergey about probing pre-trained models of code.
Yeah, I do have an organizational question. Would it be possible to get the slides to share them somehow?
Sure, I can send them. Sure.
Okay, so I guess we'll add some link to Meetup page or something. So yeah, okay.
A link to GitHub, you mean?
No, the link to the slides on the Meetup.
On the Meetup.
.com.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. Yeah. Sure. I will share them.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have some stupid question about how the computational accuracy is calculated. Yeah, first I thought that it's like accuracy of the next token, but it's not apparently to the slides.
So in this case, like there is a subset of avatar data set when you can actually run the generated code. As far as I remember, it's in Java, Sergey, right? So we generate code, we run it on some tests, and we evaluate how many programs passed all tests. So we count 1 if program passed all tests and 0 if it failed at least one test. Sergey, is
okay,
it?
I see.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So maybe we move to Sergey's presentation, and if there will be some more questions about this part, we can answer them in the end as well.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Sergey, please.
I will share slides. 1 second. Okay. Okay, do you see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, this work will be a bit orthogonal to what Nadia has presented. This work will be on probing the pre-trained models for source code, what knowledge they have about source code. Yeah, this is a joint work with Nadia and was recently accepted to Black Box NLP workshop on YamNLP. Okay, yeah, so as Nadia said, pre-trained models gaining some popularity in the sphere of source code modeling for such tasks as code generation, bug detection and repair, automated documentation. Yeah, where it's hard to create rule-based methods. Yeah, and so this work is not focused on downstream tasks. I mean, it's it's maybe hard to really understand what model understands about code and what it can do based only on downstream task quality. And so we tried to create a set of more simple tasks to test for more fine-grained aspects of code understanding. Yeah, so in NLP, there is a quite established popular approach to tests what knowledge about some particular aspects of natural text pre-trained model have, like do they understand morphology, syntax, or some semantics of text, and we based on this approach. So basically, yeah, we create this diagnostic set of probing tasks capturing diverse set of code understanding aspects and conduct some empirical study over it. So yeah, basically we have two kinds of tasks, more local ones and more global. In local task, yeah, we had some code as an input, and we target particular parts of this code, like a variable name. And so we have some model which is run over the code snippet, and we obtain the embeddings from some layer of this network. We actually choose the most efficient layer in every case. So we have this embedding from a layer, for example, for this variable name, and we train some, let's say, linear regression or classifier on top of this embedding. And in case of global case, we target the whole snippet and obtain like mean embedding from a particular layer and train a classifier or regression on top of it. So which task we consider? This is an overview of our tasks. So there are 8 of them. We tried to make them diverse. So for some of the tasks, we used data sets ready to use, like readability task, which I will describe later. And for some of the tasks, we created this task by ourselves in so these were a bit like synthetic tasks, capturing like particular aspects of code understanding. So these are synthetic tasks, like classifying local task of classification of the this path in abstract syntax tree for a particular token. And this also a global task, regression for the depth of the abstract syntax tree for a particular code snippet. These are also tasks capturing like identifier-oriented tasks. These are several of them. One task is about the concept of namespaces. Like we have this variable names, for example, y here. Yeah, you see my cursor, right? Yeah,
Yes,
so
we
yeah,
do.
we have, for example, y here, and we ask the model if it is like properly used here, targeting the embedding of this variable, like if it properly defined, like declared before used or not, and we like create a bound set for this task, inserting these print statements in different parts of code. Yeah, and there is also this data flow prediction task where we extract data flow ages from the code snippet and ask the model to classify if there is an age and what type of the age. So next there is this variable naming task when we extract some top k number of variable names and treat this as a classification task. So we mask this variable and predict the name of it. This is also a variable misuse task. So yes, this is based on the like classical variable misuse task. So when we synthetically replace misreplace some of the variable names with the wrong ones, the model should decide whether the one particular embedding corresponds to the wrong using of variable. So if there is a variable misuse error here, local task. Yeah, and there is a task more like semantic, in which we try like to ask the model to distinguish between different algorithms. So we basically parsed a task from Codeforce's problem, and so there were some wrong solutions and there were some correct solutions, and so we try to train the model to distinguish correct solutions from the wrong solutions. Yeah, and there is also readability task with is based on some data set from previous work, where developers like rated the code snippets like as they're readable or not. So yeah, the model tries to distinguish readable from not readable code snippets. Yeah, okay, so this was an overview. And yeah, the models which we use, Nadia has briefly described them. So yeah, there are some encoder models, encoder-decoder models, and decoder-only model. Yeah, and like this, the code-specific models, there are 5 of them. Yeah, and we also include here a baseline from NLP, which was not trained on code, like the BERT model. And we also included here a simple baseline to actually understand if the models work better than some very simple solution. It can be bag of words prediction, like which is order agnostic. It can be most common constant prediction for the case of classification. Yeah, so or mean predictor for regression tasks. So yeah, and a bit more about the models that we considered. So there are these models from based on NLP models like CodeBERT, PelBART, which were mainly trained with this mask language modeling objective. So the model just treats code as text and predicts the mask tokens. There are also these code-specific models like GraphCodeBERT, where authors also parsed data flow graph and created a set of 2 objectives, like additional objectives, so that the model better understands the concept of data flow and variable names. So these are prediction of variable or of data flow ages. These are some variable alignment objectives. Yeah, so, and here also is code T5 model, which also, for example, includes 2 identifier-oriented objectives like identifier tagging and masked identifier prediction. These 2 objectives in addition to like more popular NLP objectives like insertion of code, of parts of code, or code generation. Yeah, so so we come to the results on our probing sets. Here we have 8 tasks. The metric are everywhere, the lower the better. So we have these 5 5 models trained on code, BERT baseline everywhere, and this simple baseline. Yeah, so what do we see here? Actually, we see that except from 2 tasks, the models are far better, like significantly better than simple baseline. So they capture different aspects of source code. But if we look at the algorithm task and readability tasks, so for algorithm task, actually, all models perform very close to the simple bag of words baseline. Yeah, and if we compare the models to the BERT baseline, which was only pre-trained on text, yeah, we can see that for most of the tasks, code pre-trained models outperform BERT. But there is also this readability task where all models, including BERT, except from the simple baseline, perform quite similarly. So it says that, for example, for readability task, the model's pretended code does not use that particular knowledge for this task. So we can really see, diagnose the what knowledge the model use in these tasks. Yeah, and if we look at this, also if we look at these specific models for court, like Code5 and GraphCodeBERT, these models were pre-trained on identifier specific objectives and on graph, data flow graph oriented objectives. So, and we actually see that on the related tasks, these models are better than other models, like compared to CodeBERT or PelBART, for example. Yeah, so for example, on the edge prediction tasks, GraphCodeBERT excels. No surprise here, yeah, and if you look at Code5, this model is better or equal on the task oriented for variable names, yeah. So, but if you look at the other task not related to the pre-training objectives, we can hardly see any difference, like in syntax capturing objectives. So it may it may provide some intuition that we should include more like diverse pre-training objectives or pre-training objectives which correlate with downstream models. So yeah, it's maybe an interesting observation. Yeah, going. So, do you have any questions at this point? Maybe about the tasks or. Yeah. Okay. So we also compare the representations from the encoder and decoder, like which are the better and which we should use. For almost all tasks, representations from the encoder were better. So encoder really prepares the representations to be later used by the decoder, for example, like such intuition. So we should really use the representation from encoder. Yeah, and also if we compared this open source more small models and more large models. And what we saw here, considering model size, that only for variable name related objectives, like there was some difference between large and small models. So yeah, it was like this task, variable declared task, variable misused tasks, yeah, variable naming task, where actually there was some benefit from making the models larger. So it may provide also some intuition that for more synthetically oriented tasks, size is not that particularly, like it doesn't matter that much. Yeah, and also you see that for these hard tasks, there were also not much difference. Yeah, so in the next experiment, we considered also fine-tuning the task Nadia has described. So we have, so we're interested actually if we fine-tune now these models, we are focused on PelBART model here. If we fine-tune the model on different downstream tasks, like how the model will behave, what will it have some knowledge does it forget something from the pre-training when it is fine-tuned on some downstream task? So we see here blue columns. It's the initially pre-trained model. And we compare it for other models. That is the models fine-tuned on generative tasks, like code translation, code generation, code summarization, and the models fine-tuned on discriminative task, defect prediction, clone detection. Yeah, and we also include here this simple baseline, constant baseline, and finally we will see at the models trained directly on the downstream tasks without any pre-training. trained from scratch. Yeah, so as we look at the results, so we see, so we compare here the blue model, pre-trained one, with these full columns. So we see here that generative pre-training actually does not hurt the performance much. So the model do not forget much from the pre-training when they are fine-tuned on generative tasks. The best quality is for the code translation task. The model preserves the most information as it has code as both as input and the output of the model. And the worst among the generative task is for code summarization task, as the code is only as the input. So yeah, and if we now look at discriminative fine-tuning, we see that the results are getting much worse compared to initially pre-trained model, blue one. So here we see, yeah, that there is a huge information loss. So the model do not have as much information about the code as they had while being pre-trained. It may provide some intuition that for this task, there are some superficial features the model are using, so they do not need like most huge part of the information it learned during pre-training. It also can suit as some kind of diagnostic task to understand the extent to which the model use the knowledge about the code. Yeah, and we can see that the model trained from scratch, they do not generally provide rich representation, and the quality is very close in many cases to the simple baseline model. Yeah, so in the final section is some ablation that we had performed. So we also wanted to understand like which part of code the model use in which task, which part of code are important. So we have this default setup where the code is intact, and we also have in the first case we ablated punctuation. So here it is masked. In second case, we ablated identifier names. They are replaced with anonymized placeholders. In the third case, we ablated language-specific keywords like for, here, or in. Yeah. So when we look at the results, so once again, the metrics, the lower the better. We have here 3 models in comparison, like Pale-Bart model, Baird baseline, and Const baseline. So what do we? So the most important, I guess, is the first set of result in the first column for the Pale-Bart model. So we see here that ablating punctuation actually hurts the performance for most tasks. Like you can see these large red columns, except from the variable name task, for example, where ablating identifiers is the most hurtful. Yeah, you can see here these large orange columns. So we can diagnose here, like for which aspects of code, which task, which aspect of code are important. Yeah, and ablating language specific keywords appear to be not that important. It usually is the result is usually on par with the default setup where we don't ablate anything. Yeah, so it was everything I wanted to show you. There are some conclusions, like, yeah, we introduced this probing setup, pre-trained models on code, and there are some like conclusions that so the models are quite good at understanding like more syntactic aspects, syntax of code. But the results were much worse for more complex tasks, such as distinguishing algorithm tasks, types, or readability, for example. Yeah, so and we also conclude that code-specific pre-training objectives are important. It is important that they correlate with the downstream tasks, because like the models only excel on the task which more relate to the Pretrained objectives. Yes, and fine-tuning, as we saw, may lead to forgetting, especially for discriminative tasks. But fine-tuning on generative task actually preserves much of the information learned from pre-training. Yeah, and from the ablation, we saw that for almost all tasks, punctuation was most important like part of the code. And the second place is for identifiers. Yeah, and especially they are important for identifier related tasks, no surprise, yeah. And language keywords were far less important. Yeah, so thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. I hope we are in time.
Yeah, we have some maybe 10, 15 minutes for discussion. I guess I have more general questions. So very interesting study here. What would be your main takeaway for researchers and practitioners? So what should we all do to make our models better or to not make them worse?
Yeah, I guess I mainly think that more diverse pre-training objectives is very important. So not only like the standard masked language modeling objectives, although it is very good baseline for pre-training objectives, as we know. So, but yeah, I think that we should include more diverse set of pre-training objectives. Yeah. Thinking about which downstream task may be useful in practice.
Yeah, I see. Do you plan to some future work in this direction, or is it like done already? You know, not the part that you write in your conclusion, like in your paper, but like actual future work. You could be honest here. I'm just curious. So.
No, this work I think is done for now. Yeah.
Okay. I see.
Yeah, we can move more towards NLP and the new positions. Like I'm now at NLP neighbor, and Sergey, will you share or not? What are you going to do?
Oh, I'm just in the middle of this transitioning. Yeah. So.
I see. Yeah, but you know, if you have like all the frameworks, like the source code available, so like fixing, like introducing a new model, for example, a graph neural network or something, would not be that complicated, I guess. To add this to this framework and to compare.
Yes, is now working on releasing code for this project.
Yeah. I already released like most of the code. Yeah, for this project.
I'm just very used to see like a GitHub repository accompanying all of your papers. So yeah, that was like a,
thank you. Will you replace all our PO bars?
Well, maybe someone will.
Don't consume that much electricity and environmental resources.
Yeah, you should open source the weights of the models as well, I guess, to save the environment.
Yeah, and we should do it before access to the cluster closes for you as well, Sergey, because for me it's quite closed.
Yeah. Any other questions? Anyone?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that as a follow-up, we are also interested in this subtokenization for large-scale models. We're now having some discussion, like for this big code project that you probably heard of from ServiceNow. Yeah, we're also trying to like discuss something. So subtokenization is very interesting. Like, what is the best approach for the very big models? Like we have some intuition, but yeah,
So
yeah,
maybe you will be able to test in a good way whether more complex composite tokens work well with larger models or not.
Yeah, but the way in the Big Code Slack channel, they posted the link to your Code BPE paper today. So I guess you should.
Now they have a dedicated channel for tokenization, where they discuss mostly like your paper, and I also dropped a few lines about what we do in full line code completion. So you probably should also go and join.
Yes, Sergey participates there, and I'm
cool.
thinking about it whether I will be able to spend some time on that or not. Do you participate in this project, in this workshop? Which group?
Well,
you, I mean, like any of you.
Igor does, yes.
Igor.
Yeah.
What sub team? What team or how there?
No sub team right now. So I'm just going from channel to channel and sharing some knowledge and gathering some knowledge.
Cool. Yeah, I was thinking maybe about evaluation part. Yeah, but I'm still deciding whether to join or not.
Yeah, we're also still considering the options.
But Sergey is молодец. Sergey already joined.
Good for you, Sergey. Okay, then. So if there are no more questions, I guess we should thank our speakers again. There will be a recording. So yeah, I guess I should have told that like in the beginning, but I guess there was like a Zoom message telling everyone that the meeting is recorded. So I think that we're going to put this into a JetBrains Research YouTube account, but I'll post the link somewhere. So thanks again to Nadia and Sergey. And if anyone is interested in telling us about their work, so please contact me. We're very open to discuss all kinds of papers in this area. We are also having another type of meetings where we discuss papers in a more like reading club format. So I guess I'll put some announcement somewhere about those meetings as well at some point. So yeah, thank you all for coming and like follow the announcements and come back again. See you next time.
Thank you very much for...
Yeah, Misha.
Sorry, and I would also like to notice that we already have a speaker for the next meeting, which is going to be held on November 16. This is Valentin Malik from Huawei, and he's going to tell us something about applying deep learning for code, but no details are there yet, but please save the date.
Yeah, follow the meetup.com page. All the announcements will be there.
Yeah. Thank you very much for inviting us, and we will send our slides to Timofey now so that you can put them on the page.
Yep, awesome. So bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you very much for the discussion. Yeah, have a nice evening all, you all, or day,
yep,
whatever you have now. Bye.